Good morning. Thank you for taking part in this fiscal year 2020 training on state purchasing procedures and the State Purchasing Card Program. I am Courtney Sisk-Johnson with the Purchasing Division, and I'm pleased to welcome all West Virginia state officials who are required to take this annual training. I know all of you have busy schedules, so I appreciate you taking 2 hours of your day today to participate in this session. West Virginia Code 5A-3-60 requires certain state officials to take 2 hours of training annually on purchasing procedures and purchasing card use. Those required to take this training include all Executive Department Cabinet Secretaries and their deputies, Commissioners and their deputies and Assistant Commissioners, Directors and their deputies and Assistant Directors, and Department Heads and their deputies and Department Assistants. This training is offered twice per fiscal year as a webinar via WebEx. These sessions are also recorded and made available online on the State Auditor's Office and Purchasing Division's website. The online recording will suffice to meet this requirement for any individual who is unable to participate in one of the 2 scheduled live webinars. For those individuals who choose to view the online recording, they must send us their certificate of completion to ensure they receive credit for viewing the training. Today's session will last until approximately 11 o'clock. I will begin with information on the state purchasing procedures, and I will be followed by Travis Mullinax from the State Auditor's Office. The Purchasing Division has a staff of approximately 55 full-time employees at the Capitol Complex in Building 15 and at the surplus property location in Dunbar. The Purchasing Division staff provides a service function to your agencies. We are responsible for the procurement of commodities and services that your organization needs to operate your programs and services. These are the people who help make that happen. As mentioned, today's webinar will be recorded and posted on the Purchasing Division's website and also on the State Auditor's Office website within the next couple of weeks. This live webinar and its recording have been approved for 2.4 hours of in-house online CLE credit from the West Virginia State Bar. If you are interested in obtaining CLE credits for today's live webinar, please email your name and bar ID number to Samantha Knapp at the email address located on this screen. Any individual who chooses to view this recording later on must self-report their participation in this training to the State Bar per normal procedures to obtain CLE credits. Should you have any questions throughout today's presentation, you may type them into the chat box on the right-hand side of your screen. We'll take a few minutes at the end of today's presentation to answer these questions. Those of you on today's webinar represent the top level of management within state government. You are all responsible for leading and managing the delivery of services required of your agencies to the citizens of West Virginia. For your agencies to be successful in delivering these mandated services to our citizens, you need many different types of commodities and services to function. It is the Purchasing Division's responsibility to obtain on your behalf the commodities and services needed to allow you to fulfill your mission. We depend on and work closely with your procurement staff to fulfill those needs. On this slide, you can see the Purchasing Division's mission, and that is to provide prudent and fair spending practices in procuring quality goods and services at the lowest cost to state taxpayers by maximizing efficiencies and offering guidance to our customers. During today's webinar, we hope that you will obtain a general understanding of who we are, but also what we do and how we do it. We will also be addressing some of the recent changes that went into effect that impact the purchasing process. Before we talk about the process of procurement, I want to review the organizational structure of the Purchasing Division. As you can see on the screen, Mike Sheets serves as the director of the Purchasing Division. The division is then made up of 3 sections in addition to our legal counsel. They include the Acquisitions and Contract Administration section, the Communication and Technical Services section, and Program Services. The following staff members oversee these various sections. Assistant Director Frank Whitaker oversees the Acquisitions and Contract Administration section. Assistant Director Elizabeth Perdue oversees Program Services. And Samantha Knapp currently serves as the Acting Assistant Director for the Communication and Technical Services section. Additionally, Jimmy Meadows serves as the Purchasing Division's General Counsel. Now I'll highlight the responsibilities of each section. The Acquisitions and Contract Administration section is responsible for processing purchases expected to exceed $25,000 on behalf of state agencies which fall under our authority. This section also maintains the contract management and agency inspection services programs. We have a staff of 11 buyers and supervisors who are responsible for obtaining the commodities and services on behalf of state agencies. Our buyers are assigned by agency rather than commodity. They serve as the subject matter experts on the process of state procurement rather than on the specific commodities and services that they buy. The reason we're organized this way is because we believe our expertise should be in our core mission, which is purchasing, and that the staff within your agencies have the specific technical expertise, in most cases, of the commodities and services that you need. Of the 11 buyers, we have designated Senior Buyer Mark Atkins as the statewide contracts buyer to manage the nearly 50 contracts that are mandatory for use by all state agencies falling under our authority. To assist your agencies in developing specifications, the Purchasing Division maintains specification templates for elevator and HVAC maintenance, tractors, and security systems, which are to be used as a starting point for agencies for these items. The specification templates are posted on our website and can be used and modified by the agency as needed. A link to those templates will be posted at the end of this presentation. Looking back at our structure, having our buyers assigned to specific agencies means that each of your agencies has a sole point of contact in the Purchasing Division, which allows the Purchasing Division to provide better customer service to your agencies. The assigned buyer for your agency works together with your agency-designated procurement officer or officers to buy the commodities and services required by your agencies. These relationships are critical in ensuring success during the procurement process. The next section of the Purchasing Division is the Communication and Technical Services section. This section is responsible for technology, communication, professional development and training, and related administrative functions, including vendor registration, imaging and record retention, bid receipt, and purchase order encumbrance. This training today is prepared and coordinated through this section. The final section is Program Services. This section is responsible for several programs administered by the division, including the Surplus Property Program, which manages the state and federal programs for property no longer needed within the respective governments, the Travel Management Office, which offers guidance to state business travelers and oversees statewide contracts for travel-related services, the Fixed Assets Unit, which maintains the state's inventory of personal property. As mentioned previously, we also have a general counsel who manages all of our legal affairs, including contract terms and conditions, disputes and resolutions, drafting legislation, and other relevant legal and administrative issues. Most state governments throughout the nation have a centralized procurement function like West Virginia. However, the administration and rules vary with each state. West Virginia Code centralizes the procurement function of state government within the Purchasing Division in the same way that other functions are centralized for most agencies, including personnel, technology, finance, and retirement. Some of the benefits of a centralized procurement function include having the consistency of laws, rules, and procedures, gaining economies of scale, providing system transparency, and having a central point of contact for process-related questions. The Purchasing Division manages procurement transactions for agencies under its authority, including but not limited to those for commodities, services, and technology. State agencies have been delegated the authority to make purchases up to $25,000, with the Purchasing Division processing all transactions expected to exceed that dollar threshold. The Purchasing Division has awarded statewide contracts for commonly used commodities and services, including office supplies, technology equipment and services, and vehicles. We bid and award statewide contracts for these common commodities and services on behalf of all state agencies to take advantage of the economies of scale and to make the ordering process more efficient. A list of all statewide contracts can be found on the Purchasing Division's website. We also buy a wide range of agency-specific commodities and services, from food to medical supplies and everything in between. We participate in cooperative contracts that have been bid and awarded by other public entities around the country to gain economies of scale and shorten the procurement process. These contracts may be used by our agencies upon approval. All of our procedures are based on laws and rules established in West Virginia Code and the West Virginia Code of State Rules. Our primary code citation is 5A3, and our rules can be found as Title 148, Series 1 of the Code of State Rules. As noted on this slide, there are also specific code citations for architectural and engineering services, construction, and our two set-aside programs, Correctional Industries and the State Use Program. As is the case with many other state functions, there are some exceptions to this centralized procurement system. The legislature has statutorily granted various state agencies the ability to perform some or all of those agencies' procurement function outside of the centralized procurement mandate. At this time, the Purchasing Division is aware of 46 full or partial statutory exemptions. Full exemptions include entities such as the legislative and judicial branches of government, higher education, agencies including the Division of Corrections, Juvenile Services, and State Police, and DHHR for facilities providing direct patient care, while partial exemptions have been granted for the Division of Highways for road constructions, PEIA contracts for insurance coverage, and equipment for the Division of Protective Services as necessary to maintain security at the Capitol Complex, among others. The Purchasing Division has compiled an unofficial list of these statutory exemptions, which can be found on the Purchasing Division's website. Title 148 of the Code of State Rules stipulates that all purchases be approved by the Secretary or head of a spending unit or designee, whose name must be filed with the Purchasing Division. The person designated is responsible for the agency's procurement function at the agency delegated level and works directly with the Purchasing Division to process formal acquisitions expected to exceed $25,000. They should be involved at all levels of any future purchases your agency plans to make. Their understanding and knowledge of the state purchasing process can ensure that your agency remains in compliance with state law. It is essential that the designated procurement officers are trained on the Purchasing Division's procedures. In addition to being responsible for any internal training conducted at the agency level, the designee is required by the West Virginia Code of State Rules to take 10 hours annually of training offered by the Purchasing Division, which is tracked on a fiscal year basis. The designated procurement officers for each state spending unit under our authority are listed on our website. This list is updated each fiscal year and as changes occur throughout the year. The link to this listing will be included at the end of our presentation today. The Purchasing Division prides itself on having a comprehensive training program to educate our agency purchasers on the laws and rules which govern the state purchasing process and to assist them in obtaining the 10 hours of required training annually. Trainings are offered through a variety of platforms, including in-person, online via webinars, and on-demand training modules, and through an annual conference. Our 2019 Agency Purchasing Conference was held September 17th through the 20th at Lakeview Resort in Morgantown and provided training and networking opportunities. Approximately 270 agency-designated procurement officers attended, and were able to receive their 10 hours of required training during that week. We are currently researching facilities to host our 2020 conference, and more information will be available on our website once we know more. We also maintain a state certification program which has been recognized by the Division of Personnel as part of its pay plan policy. That program incorporates public procurement experience, training offered by the Purchasing Division, a hands-on component, and a final examination. More information on our training program can be found on our website, wvpurchasing.gov, by clicking on the training link on the left-hand side of the page. During fiscal year 2018, the Purchasing Division reported that more than 22,000 new award transactions and delivery orders were processed, exceeding $489 million. This number includes all delivery orders processed against central master agreements at both the agency level, which are called agency delivery orders, and through the Purchasing Division, which are called central delivery orders. A central master agreement, which is processed by the Purchasing Division, covers a specified period in which all terms, conditions, and prices are stated, but quantity is not. Delivery orders may be made from these contracts for specific quantities. Nearly 54% of the contracts and delivery orders for fiscal year 2018 were awarded to West Virginia companies. In addition to new purchase and delivery orders, we also processed nearly 1,800 change orders to existing contracts. These numbers show the significance of what we do. It is because this money comes from our taxpayer dollars that we have a duty to ensure that it is being spent efficiently and ethically. For this reason, we have developed a decision path to assist our agency purchasers from the time the agency determines a need to the award of a purchase order or contract. For additional statistical data for fiscal year 2018, you can view our annual report on our website at wvpurchasing.gov. This slide highlights the first few steps in the purchasing decision path. Step 1 requires the agency to first determine its need. In other words, what is the product or service required by the agency, what quality and quantity is needed, what is the estimated cost, and are there any special delivery requirements? Once your agency has determined that information, you can move on to step 2 of the process, which is to seek availability of the commodity or service through internal sources. There are 3 internal sources to note, including correctional industries, the State Use Program, also known as sheltered workshops, and the West Virginia State Agency for Surplus Property. Correctional industries and sheltered workshops are mandatory for use. That means if the product or service is available through either of these entities, it must be acquired from them. If the product or service is available but not in the required time, quality, quantity, or other factors, then a written waiver must be issued from correctional industries or sheltered workshops in accordance with purchasing guidelines. Surplus property is optional but strongly encouraged for use for state agencies when needing furniture, vehicles, equipment, and many other commodities. A waiver from surplus property is not required, but keep in mind that it's another source that may save your agency money. They also manage the federal surplus property program, which we'll talk about a little bit later in this presentation. If the product or service is not available from any of the internal sources, step 3 requires the agency to determine if the product or service is available from an existing statewide or agency contract. If it is available from either of these types of contracts, the agency must purchase the product or service from that statewide or agency contract. Although we don't have it mentioned on this slide, if the commodity or service is not available from a statewide or agency contract, the next step requires the agency to determine if the purchase is considered an emergency purchase or a direct award procurement. I'll go into more detail about these purchase types later, but for your reference, more information on these types of purchases can be found in the Purchasing Division Procedures Handbook. If you've gone through the first few steps of the process and can't find the commodity or service on any of the mandatory contracts, and you have determined this will not be an emergency or direct award purchase, at this point, you would be looking at the competitive bidding process. There are several types of competitive solicitations used by the Purchasing Division. I'll get into those in a minute, but first, please note that agencies are delegated the authority to purchase commodities and services up to $25,000, and there are some spending thresholds within that amount they should be aware of. The thresholds within agency delegated authority are outlined on this slide. Agencies cannot exceed a spending threshold without the proper level of documentation and bidding. Commodities and services that are expected to cost $2,500 or less require no bids, although competition is always encouraged. Purchases of $2,500.01 to $10,000 require 3 verbal bids, and the lowest bid meeting specification must be awarded the purchase order or contract. Purchases of $10,001 to $25,000 require 3 written bids, and the lowest bid meeting specifications must be awarded the purchase order or contract. Any purchase expected to exceed $25,000 is considered a formal purchase and must be processed through the Purchasing Division. In short, the agency would process the competitive solicitation at the agency level following its agency delegated procedures if it's expected to cost $25,000 or less, or at the formal level if it's expected to exceed $25,000. All vendors conducting business with the state of West Virginia are required to register with the Purchasing Division in accordance with West Virginia Code 5A-3-12. There is an exception to this registration requirement, which includes purchasing card vendors providing travel-related services or receiving an aggregate total yearly payment of less than $25,000 from a state spending unit. Although vendors do not have to be an approved paid vendor to submit a bid, they may be required to create a user account in WVOASIS if they wish to submit their bid electronically. This account is not the same as registering with the Purchasing Division's vendor registration program, which would be required if the vendor receives a purchase order or contract. That registration, while using the same account, requires certain disclosures and banking information. Vendors are encouraged to register through the Vendor Self-Service Portal as part of WVOASIS, but may also still complete a paper form through our registration office. Vendors receiving orders for goods or services exceeding $2,500, regardless of payment method, must pay an annual fee of $125. There are a couple of exceptions as to who must pay the fee. These include purchasing card vendors providing travel-related services or receiving an aggregate total yearly payment of less than $25,000 from a spending unit, as well as direct award vendors and those vendors who are providing goods and services that have been declared as impossible to bid. These products and services are listed in Section 9 of our Purchasing Division Procedures Handbook. Vendors must also be in good standing with other state and local agencies, such as the Secretary of State's Office, Workers' Compensation, and the Tax Department to be able to receive a purchase order or contract. Anytime your agency determines that it will need to competitively solicit goods or services, you should immediately begin to think about the specifications, which will be the basis for everything you'll do moving forward. A specification is a concise statement explaining the type of good or service that is needed, the quality level, and special requirements in the design, performance, delivery, and usage. There are 4 different types of specifications, which include brand name or equal, performance, and design specifications, and when approved through the proper channels, there are also standardization specifications. I'll go over each type briefly. The brand name or equal type requires the words "or equal" to follow the brand name to inform vendors that alternate bids will be considered. Following the 2018 legislative session, agencies may now create a standard eliminating the need for the "or equal" language in some instances. That is known as the standardization specification. The performance specification focuses more on how well an item operates and includes total ownership cost for operating and maintaining the product. The design specification concentrates on the dimensional and other physical requirements of the item being purchased and is used when a commodity has to be specially made to meet the agency's unique needs. Specifications are incorporated into the requisition that the agency submits to the purchasing division for formal purchases and into the solicitation advertised by agencies for agency delegated purchases. Not only do specifications tell the vendor exactly what your agency needs, they often serve as your defense if a vendor protests a contract award. We'll discuss protests a little later on. The Purchasing Division strongly believes in the importance of specifications. In 2018, we announced the first ever recipient for the Purchasing Division's Excellence in Specification Writing Award, which looks at the scope, pricing, administrative, time, and appearance readability of the specification. We were pleased to announce as the second recipient at the 2019 Agency Purchasing Conference, the Department of Environmental Protection for its specifications for the pumping, hauling, and disposing of leachate from landfills across the state. Now that we've addressed the importance of specifications, let's review some of the competitive solicitation types used by the Purchasing Division. The most commonly used method of procurement is the Request for Quotations method, or RFQ. This type of purchase is used to acquire all tangible property, such as equipment and supplies. The basis for award with this method is straightforward. The award is made to the lowest responsible bidder who meets all mandatory specifications. The next type is a Request for Proposals method, referred to as an RFP, and is typically used for services. This type is a best value procurement method and is limited to procurements with an estimated value of $100,000 or more. The agency must obtain approval from the purchasing director to use this method. They must submit their justification for using this process in writing, whether or not the solicitation will ultimately replace a current purchase order or contract, and identify what that contract is if it does. The RFP is received in two distinct parts, the technical proposal and the cost proposal. The evaluation is based on a 100-point total score, with cost representing a minimum of 30 of the 100 points possible. The technical proposal is opened first, and the RFP Evaluation Committee reviews and evaluates those, sending their written consensus to the Purchasing Division buyer. Vendors must score a minimum of 70% of the 70 points possible to be considered. This is known as the minimum acceptable score. Vendors who do not obtain the minimum accepted score, which is 49 points in most cases, are disqualified and removed from further consideration. The cost proposals are then opened. The Evaluation Committee will review the cost proposals, assign appropriate points, and make a final consensus recommendation to the Purchasing Division buyer. The award is based on the highest score, which is a combination of the technical proposals and the cost proposals. A second best value procurement method that we utilize is the expression of interest, or EOI. This type is utilized in the procurement of architectural and engineering services for projects estimated to exceed $250,000. The EOI includes a statement of qualifications and performance data and may include a vendor's anticipated concepts and proposed methods of approach to a project. The committee will evaluate the information submitted with the proposal and then develop a short list of 3 firms they believe are best qualified to perform the desired service. They will then meet with each firm on the short list to conduct an interview to discuss their anticipated concepts and proposed methods. The committee will rank the firms deemed to be most highly qualified based on the information discussed during their interview and submit that list to the purchasing division. At that time, the agency will enter into negotiations with the most qualified firm as to the scope of service and price. If the agency fails to negotiate a satisfactory contract with the most qualified firm, they will then move on to the next firm. If negotiations fail with all firms, they will rebid the solicitation. The Purchasing Division uses WV Oasis and its vendor self-service vendor portal. WV Oasis allows us to advertise all solicitations expected to exceed $10,000, with vendors having access to that information in real time. The advertising mechanism in WV Oasis is called the West Virginia Purchasing Bulletin. Using the vendor self-service portal, vendors can search for current solicitations using keywords. They can view solicitations processed at the agency delegated level as well as those that are processed at the formal level. Within WV Oasis, solicitations are assigned an A or a C in front of the document name. Those with an A are processed at the agency level, and those with a C, which stands for centralized, are processed by the Purchasing Division. As previously mentioned, a vendor does not have to be registered to submit a bid, but will need to create an account if that bid is submitted electronically. One of the benefits of creating an account is that a vendor can assign itself commodity codes, which means that they would be notified any time a solicitation is publicized using those commodity codes. This makes it much easier for the vendor to stay informed of ongoing solicitations that may be pertinent to them. The Purchasing Division requests the assistance of the state agency in evaluating the bids for its solicitations, since they wrote the specifications and have a full understanding of what they need. After they review the bids, the agencies then submit a recommendation for award to the Purchasing Division. For formal acquisitions, which are those exceeding $25,000, the Purchasing Division is the only entity that can issue or change those contracts, and all questions regarding those contracts should be directed to the Purchasing Division buyer who was responsible for processing that contract. After the evaluation process, the Purchasing Division will send the contract to the Attorney General's office for approval as to form. Upon approval, the contract is then encumbered by the Purchasing Division and sent to the vendor. Encumbrance ensures that the agency has the funds to make the specific purchase. No work can begin until the vendor has the encumbered purchase order or contract in hand, or until a notice to proceed is issued. It's important to note that from the time an agency submits a requisition to the Purchasing Division until an award is made, no communication may be made between the agency and any vendor regarding the solicitation out for bid to ensure fairness and transparency. This is considered the blackout period, and all communication with vendors relating to the solicitation during that time must be directed to the Purchasing Division buyer. The Code of State Rules gives vendors the opportunity to challenge the contract specifications written by the agency or to challenge the ultimate contract award. The protest of specifications allows the vendor to protest the specifications prior to the actual award being made and prior to bids being opened, and must be submitted no later than 5 working days prior to the bid opening. The protest of specifications is intended to guard against an agency that inadvertently, or maybe in some cases intentionally, drafted specifications that circumvent competitive bidding. This may be done by including specifications that are too restrictive that only a few vendors can meet them. On the flip side, specifications can be too vague. allowing vendors to provide a less than acceptable quality level commodity or service, or provide a product or service above and beyond what is needed, driving up the cost. The protest of award, on the other hand, is the most common type of protest received by the purchasing division. This type of protest must be submitted no later than 5 working days after the award is made, which is the day the contract is encumbered. There are several reasons a vendor may protest the contract of award. A vendor may protest if the winning vendor bid inferior commodities that are not equal or failed to meet a mandatory specification, which was ultimately missed by the agency and or the purchasing division during the evaluation process. So we've talked about the various types of competitive procurements, but now I want to touch on some other types. The first is direct award procurements, which was a change made during the 2018 legislative session as part of Senate Bill 283, and for which rules were formally promulgated during the last legislative session. Direct award is when a commodity or service is believed to be available by one vendor or that no other vendor would be willing or able to provide the commodity or service without a detrimental effect to the agency. In all cases, the law requires that agencies document their attempts to secure competition. For purchases up to $25,000, the agency declares and processes its own direct award procurements and must provide written justification in the agency file. A direct award request for consideration form, which is the WB-65A, must be completed and approved by the agency procurement officer. This will be important to remember for when our purchasing division inspectors visit your agency to inspect its purchases for compliance. For direct award procurements that are expected to exceed $25,000, the agency must complete and submit to the purchasing division a direct award request form, which is the WB-65, to determine the basis for the direct award procurement and the specific efforts made to determine the availability of other sources. For direct awards processed by the agency and those processed through the purchasing division, the intent to make the direct award procurement must be advertised to the vendor community for at least 10 business days. The purchasing division advertises the solicitation in the purchasing bulletin to allow vendors the opportunity to express interest in the direct award procurement. If a vendor expresses interest and provides proper documentation that they can in fact provide the commodity or service in question, then the purchasing division may reject the direct award and require the agency to competitively bid the commodity or service. If no vendors respond, however, the purchasing division may then proceed with a direct award purchase with the vendor. West Virginia Code also recognizes that purchases may be necessary when unforeseen causes arise, including delays by contractors, delays in transportation, an unanticipated volume of work, flooding to workplace buildings, power outages, or fires. 3 bids are required for emergency purchases if possible. Emergency purchases that are expected to exceed $25,000 must first be approved by the purchasing director. However, if the emergency occurs after business hours, on a weekend, or on a holiday, the agency may proceed with the emergency purchase, but must follow up with the purchasing director on the first business day with their justification and all documentation. An emergency purchase is a short-term solution to fix a problem and may not be used as a permanent or long-term solution or to circumvent the normal competitive bidding process. Instead, an emergency purchase allows for an immediate solution to a problem until it can be properly bid. Keep in mind that emergency purchases are not used for hardship resulting from neglect, poor planning, or lack of organization by the spending unit. The purchasing division also maintains an impossible-to-bid list of commodities and services, which is updated each July. This list can be found at Section 9 of the Purchasing Division Procedures Handbook. West Virginia Code gives the purchasing director the authority to determine which commodities and services are not possible to obtain through the competitive bidding process. Purchasing division approval is not required for these procurements unless specifically noted. However, spending units purchasing from vendors under the impossible to bid list must continue to follow the standard purchasing procedure associated with a normal purchase of the same dollar amount, including vendor registration, and must continue to submit contracts to the Attorney General's office for approval as to form. Now let's discuss what to do in the event that you experience any issues with vendors. First and foremost, ensure that you understand the contract in its entirety and its requirements. It's important that the issue tie back to a specification that the vendor has failed to meet. Have you brought up the issue with the vendor? In some cases, they may not even know there is an issue. Make sure to give them an opportunity to make things right. Be sure to document all efforts made to resolve the issue, including phone conversations, emails, and letters. Finally, if multiple attempts to resolve the issue have failed, you can complete the vendor performance form, which is the WV-82, and submit it to the Purchasing Division with all supporting documentation and correspondence. If one agency has an issue with a vendor, other agencies may as well, so having that documentation will assist the Purchasing Division in coming to a solution of how to proceed. Due to a collective effort to make the state procurement process more efficient and expedient, the Purchasing Division has worked closely with our agency purchasers, the administration, and legislators during the past few years to identify areas that would improve how we purchase commodities and services while maintaining the safeguards and integrity of the procurement process. Because of this continued effort, Senate Bill 283 passed and was signed into law as part of the 2018 legislative session. As a result of that bill, the Purchasing Division promulgated rules during the 2019 legislative session, which went into effect in April 2019. We have also made various procedural changes over the last year, some of which we'll discuss in the coming slides. Now I'll highlight some of those rules. A new provision was added regarding contract cancellation. According to the new provision, if a vendor protests a contract award based on an error made and that error can be proven or confirmed, the contract may be canceled without notice and awarded to the next low bid. According to the previous rule, there had to be a pattern of unacceptable performance before action of suspension could be taken against a vendor. With the new rule, a single occurrence may now suffice for this type of action. Additionally, the rule makes it easier to debar a related party to a debarred vendor. Vendors that receive a direct award may have the registration fee waived if the purchasing director deems it appropriate. However, a fee waiver only applies on a transactional basis, so if that vendor also provides goods and/or services through the competitive bid process, then the registration fee would be required at that time. During the 2018 legislative session, vendor preference was changed significantly. A reciprocal preference was created that allowed West Virginia vendors to receive a preference on state solicitations when bidding against out-of-state vendors if those vendors are eligible to receive a preference in their home state. But this reciprocal preference added time to the procurement process because we have no process to check whether an out-of-state vendor qualified for preference in their own state. The new rule still requires vendors to make their request for preference, whether traditional or reciprocal, at the time they submit their bid. But now, with the request, the vendor must provide proof, such as a certificate of good standing from the tax division and their Secretary of State filings or affidavit. The required documentation is outlined in the rule. Sole source language was modified to direct award to provide consistency with the language in West Virginia Code. RFP scoring language was modified to allow for best-in-class comparison. Previously, when requesting to utilize a cooperative contract, the various requirements took agencies a lot of time and effort to research and document. The new rule significantly streamlines the cooperative contracting process by allowing agencies to document only that the cooperative contract is valid, was properly awarded, financially advantageous, and comparable to what they could obtain through competitive bidding. The new rule requires that all vendors be treated equally during the standardization process. For example, if one vendor is provided an opportunity to conduct an oral presentation, then all vendors must be provided that same opportunity. Now I will highlight some of the procedural changes that have taken place in the last year. This last fiscal year, the Purchasing Division worked with the Attorney General's Office to update the agreement addenda and merge information from two forms into a single document. The changes including adding space at the top of the page to identify the contract and various contracting parties, adding order of precedence language, expanding the form to make it more readable, and minor modifications to the actual terms. The changes to the form serve to simplify and improve the form while also providing better protection for the state. During the last fiscal year, the Purchasing Division also created a new reference document to provide procurement officers with guidance on the submission of header documents within WVOASIS. The document was created in response to questions and requests received directly from procurement officers and covers a variety of submissions to the Purchasing Division, including solicitation, requests for requisitions, change orders, addenda, and central delivery orders. The Purchasing Division reformatted its inspection report to make it more useful for the agencies. The previous format only detailed what state agencies did wrong, but the new format includes areas in which the agency has excelled. Rather than being formatted by each transaction, the revised report is formatted by finding and lists each transaction that is non-compliant. This year, the Purchasing Division began posting emergency purchase request approvals on its website, and within the last couple of months, we've also moved all Purchasing Division forms from the intranet to the internet to make them accessible to all procurement officers. Previously, most of our forms were only posted on the intranet, and we found that not all agencies, particularly boards and commissions, had access to the state's intranet. Finally, we created an RFP packet to assist agencies with the RFP process. The packet is included in our handbook and with the forms posted on our website, and include templates for the technical scoring spreadsheet, the technical scoring memorandum, the recommendation for award memorandum, and even the agency approval request form to utilize the RFP process. The Purchasing Division is continually seeking ways that we can improve the process, whether through legislation or rule changes, or through internal and procedural processes. We welcome all feedback. Now that we've discussed the organizational structure of the Purchasing Division, in addition to the various types of procurement methods, I'll briefly touch on other programs that are administered by the Purchasing Division. The first is the Travel Management Office. The Travel Management Office offers guidance through the state travel policy, which governs state employees who are conducting in-state, out-of-state, and international business travel with the state of West Virginia. This policy addresses such areas as transportation, lodging, meals, registration fees, other expenses, and forms of payment. Fixed assets. Agencies are responsible for certifying their inventory by July 15th of every year. The agency head must certify the date of the last physical inventory, that all items meeting entry requirements have been entered into the fixed asset systems, and that all retired items were retired in accordance with surplus property policy, procedures, and guidelines. A physical inventory must be conducted once every 3 years. And the final program is surplus property. The West Virginia State Agency for Surplus Property is responsible for the disposition of commodities or expendable commodities no longer needed by the state, or more specifically, the owning state agency. Surplus property must approve all methods of disposition related to the commodities regardless of the acquisition cost. This slide leaves you with a few helpful resources should you wish to learn more about the state purchasing process, including the procurement officer listing I mentioned earlier in this presentation, the Purchasing Division's website, the new Purchasing Division Procedures Handbook, which went into effect on April 11th, 2019, the Vendor Procurement Guide, our intranet site, and our specification repository. Please keep in mind that we will take a few minutes at the end of today's presentation to answer any questions you may have, so please continue to send those questions to the host. On behalf of the Purchasing Division, I appreciate your attention. We will now prepare the presentation slides for the purchasing card portion of today's training. Thank you.
Well, good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Appreciate your time and the efforts to be here. This is Travis Mullinax. I'm the training administrator for the Purchasing Card Division. I'm here with my boss, Amy Lewis, who is assisting me today, and together we're going to be discussing this great, awesome program called the Purchasing Card Program. And again, we're grateful you're here. Hopefully we provide some great information for you, maybe even stirs up some questions that you are more than welcome to ask. There is the chat online on your screen. Just want to reiterate the importance of that. If you have any questions, whether it is purchasing related, whether it is P-card related, please utilize the chat functionality, and we will gather those questions. And at the end of our talk today, we will go through those and answer those accordingly. So let's get to it. We're discussing the Purchasing Card Program. Believe it or not, the Purchasing Card Program has been around since 1996. That's a long time. I'm sure maybe some of you listening today were in state government back then, and you might remember the Purchasing Card Program when it first came into play. But when it comes to the Purchasing Card Program, what I always enjoy to do to start off our talk is actually kind of give some statistics. I always find that very interesting information. And since most of us online here are responsible for the financial pieces when it comes to your own internal responsibilities, this is one of those pieces that I think is interesting. We actually have approximately 8,300 P-cards statewide. That's a lot of P-cards that are out there, and certainly all of those are necessary in light of the job duties that have been given to the individuals charged with those P-cards. And I'm sure they're doing a great job in the responsibilities associated with those. But there's 192 master accounts or managing accounts. Those two words can oftentimes be synonymous with one another. And within those 192 master accounts, there's roughly about 130 or so state agencies that are part of the P-card program. That is a lot of oversight that's needed for that, and we'll talk about oversight here in the presentation later on. But in the last fiscal year, 2019, we have had approximately 630,375 transactions that were processed on the P-card. That's a lot of transactions. On average, it's about $771 per transaction, which might seem like a lot, considering most of our transactions are low dollar type transactions, your everyday transaction, whether it is parts that mechanics would utilize, whether it's office supplies, certainly transactions, most of them are, if you will, low-hanging fruit type transactions. But in light of the agencies like DOT, our good friends there in transportation, buying asphalt, and salt and many other large ticket items, we have an average of $771. This equates itself to $486 million in volume, which is a significant amount of money. But this is really fascinating considering our overall state budget. And when you do the analysis of it, the state of West Virginia is #1 in the entire country as it relates to the total state budget and how much of that state budget is used when the P-card is used as a payment mechanism, and just comparing the dollars that are in play as it relates to other states around the country. We are #1. We do an excellent job of utilizing the P-card. Of course, there's always room for more and for improvement in that, and we will talk about that, but we are certainly doing a great job as it stands right now. Using the P-card has some innate savings, some what we call cost avoidance savings. And this past year, because of the 630,375 transactions we put on the P-card, equating to $486 million in volume, This saved the state $40 million. It saved the state. This is purchases that we were doing, that we were going to be making no matter what methodology of payment we were going to be doing. But because we chose P-card as the payment mechanism for these transactions, we saved the state $40 million. Now, as a result of that, the state was able to use that $40 million and so many other great programs that the state utilizes. And so it is such a value to use the P-card. And what I mean by that is this. Estimates of the cost of using a traditional procure-to-pay process kind of ranges from $50 to $200. Of course, there's cost, there's processing costs, if you will, there's administrative costs always associated with the purchase, whether you're using the traditional procure-to-pay or the P-card. There are costs associated with it. A large number of check payments are made to low-value items to a large number of suppliers. Now, what we mean by that is just the reality that no matter the cost of the item, if you're going to use a check, for example, to pay for that item, the cost to actually print a check, to process a check, to create the check, when it comes to the administrative cost, that has a dollar amount associated with it. And sometimes, many times, that dollar amount, just to even have a check printed, is going to be more than the actual item that the check is paying for. And so, in other words, it's costing the state more money to run a payment through a check than for the item by which it's paying for. And this is why we say if we flip to the P-card, it has an innate savings, a payment method that happens, and when it comes to P-card, this efficiency savings, and that ranges about a 55% to 80% savings. Now, there is a National Association of Purchasing Card Professionals, or known as the NAPCP, and these individuals, they are in the trenches when it comes to the purchasing cards nationwide and all the different statistics in play, and they are telling us that when you switch from the traditional procure-to-pay to the P-card, you are saving $63 on average per transaction. Per transaction. So if you take that $63 and you apply that mathematically to the 630,000 transactions we did, that's where we get our $40 million savings. That's where it comes from. And so if we had not utilized the P-card, and therefore we had to run those 630,000 transactions through the traditional procure-to-pay to which checks were being issued, it was going to cost the state $40 million more just to do that. And so the P-card program is such a powerful program, and it saves the state tremendous amount of money. And understanding this, the state auditor actually in February of 2018 sent out a press release. And I mentioned this last time we were together, this past spring, as well as the previous fall, a year ago, that in February of 18, in this press release, the state auditor made it be known that his office was making it a priority to ensure that all new vendors doing business with the state, both in and out of state, were going to be required to use an electronic fund transfer system, or EFT system, or accept payment through the state P-card. In other words, we need to significantly reduce the number of checks that were being printed and processed on a daily basis, on a weekly basis, on a monthly, yearly basis. We need to reduce the cost. And so our office was helping these vendors get set up for EFT or to accept P-card so that we can reduce the number of checks. In fact, at the time of this press release, we were in the state auditor's office printing around 20,000 checks to vendors on a weekly basis. On a weekly basis. Now, no doubt that number has most certainly been reduced since the time of this press release, but that still is a significantly large number, and you can understand the auditor's passion to try to reduce that number as much as possible. And so that is such a huge idea when it comes to how can we save the state money. And so are you all internally doing your part to ensure that we are saving the state as much money as possible? that's a good question to ask yourself as you consider, certainly the audience today listening, you are no doubt individuals that are probably in a position of leadership to where you are making some of these financial decisions, and you are in charge in large part of the oversight of those financial decisions within your agency. And are you all doing the best you can to save the state as much money as possible? And naturally, with our talk today and partnering with the purchasing division, part of our job is to highlight the use of the P card as the payment mechanism. And that really is the key. That really is the key, because as I've demonstrated for you thus far, there is savings to be found when we use the P card as the payment mechanism. So certainly take some notes if you don't mind, and maybe just do an analysis of the vendors that you are currently utilizing, and do a deep dive and really see, are these vendors either set up for EFT? Do they accept the P card? If they're set up to accept Visa, then is your agency utilizing the P card when you are needing to purchase goods or services through that vendor? Certainly it's worth the time and investigation on your part to ensure that you are saving the state as much money as possible. And now, as is our responsibility, I need to review some of the most basic general information of the purchasing card program. That is part of the reason why we're here this morning. And as I've demonstrated thus far, the P card is the preferred method of payment. It just is. For all the savings that can happen, that's one major way, but it's efficient. And it's an effective process for the payment of state expenditures. And what's great about it is that, I tell you what, any of your people that are using the P card, anywhere they are, they swipe that card. We know exactly where they are, what they bought, the time and date stamp are on there. We know all that. The transparency reality of that purchase, we know about it. It's so much easier to track when it comes to an auditing perspective, when it comes to knowing where your money's being spent. If it is for a situation, and hopefully not, if there's a fraud situation going on, misuse and abuse, we can capture that right away because this is an electronic record of that transaction. It does effectively decrease all of the account payable expenses. Again, that 55 to 80% decrease that we discussed, and that increased control and monitoring, such an important piece to this puzzle that no doubt those listening today that you are in charge of. We do have a policies and procedures manual that naturally establishes the minimum standards for the use of the P card. We know about the policy and procedures manual. No doubt that you guys probably have a few copies of the policy and procedures laying around. I'm sure if you're like me, you read them before you go to bed every single night as your nighttime reading. But nonetheless, it is our minimum standards, and certainly welcome you to make those standards known to you. And in doing so, though, also understand that an agency is allowed to make your own internal control procedures more stringent than what the policy procedures state. Naturally, you have to follow those policy procedures, the minimum standards, but you have every right to make your standards more stringent should you choose. But the big thing here is that you do have to have an internal control procedures in place. It has to be documented. How do you run your P card program internally? Who's in charge of what? Who is doing the oversight internally? Who are the coordinators? What are their job duties and responsibilities? Who are the cardholders? What are their job duties and responsibilities? So it's important that your internal controls are very complete, are very thorough. I would recommend to you that if your internal control procedures are just simply one page long, it probably is not thorough enough. And you should visit those controls again and take the opportunity to make sure they are thorough and complete and adequate, so that when either internal auditors or external auditors visit you all and they are reviewing, auditing your P card program, that you have a good, complete internal control process, procedure in place so they can test on their audit those procedures, and that you would be able to have a good report at the conclusion. Speaking of coordinators and the job duties at hand, it it is really important to make sure that all of your people that carry that responsibility, that wear that hat internally of that oversight and review as a coordinator, that they know all the procedures, all the policies, all the rules and laws and guidelines. That includes purchasing rules. Understand that there's a partnership that we have with purchasing. We certainly look to them to provide guidance on what you are or are not allowed to purchase. If there's supposed to be an award document in play or whatever the situation may be, there is a partnership there, and it's incumbent upon your coordinators to know what those rules are, those guidelines. But not just them, of course. That means agency heads, your CFOs, your managers, your supervisors, pretty much anybody in your P-card program, from cardholder all the way up. Everybody needs to be knowledgeable of all of the rules and guidelines that surround the P-card program itself. But ultimately, somebody does have to carry the weight of responsibility. Somebody has to be at the very top of this pyramid, if you will, the top of the hill, and is the one that's ultimately responsible for the program. And that is the agency head, or in some cases, the agency head is also the CFO. But that person, the person that's at the top of your agency, that person is ultimately responsible for the administration and monitoring and the oversight of your program. So I'm so thankful if that is you today and you're here listening to this. We're so grateful you have taken time to be part of this, because you are the individual, since you are ultimately responsible for the program. It's really valuable for you to know the ins and outs of the program and to where you can figure out maybe where the holes are in the program and then to shore those up, or to figure out where the areas that you can, if you will, increase or get better. So certainly take a moment and consider your duties and responsibilities as the agency head and CFO, and make sure that proper oversight and administration is taking place. One of the things just is the reality, and I would say back in 2014 when we went live with Oasis, we saw and anticipated this reality that there was going to be some turnover. Certainly some turnover because individuals were at the age of retirement, and so they were able to move forward with their retirement, and certainly huge congratulations to those who have. But when they were in that position of a primary coordinator position and therefore retired and moved on, that left a vacancy there that had to be filled. And whenever there is a change at the coordinator position, we as the State Auditor's Office P-card division, we need to know about it. We need to know about it because we need to make sure that our records properly identify who the primary coordinators are. Now, the reason why that's important is because from our perspective, we are not going to necessarily reach out to the agency head or the CFO if they're not the primary coordinator. We're going to reach out to the primary coordinator first. If there's a concern, a question, if we're trying to get a hold of you all, we're going to reach out to the primary coordinator first. And if John Doe is who we have on record, but then John Doe is no longer with you, we reach out to John Doe and we're not getting that person, that's obviously problematic. So please ensure that we have on record who the primary coordinator is, and ideally, if we know about it before they leave. If you know that the primary coordinator is going to be leaving your agency, please be kind to let us know in advance of that. That way we can properly prepare our records. We can also properly prepare and help in training, if requested, to get the new person, the new primary coordinator, up to speed, so that when the one person leaves the position and the new person moves into that position, there's a nice, smooth transition, and therefore your program is able to maintain its good course moving forward. We've talked about the knowledge and experience that is necessary. I do want to say that we do have an annual training that we provide all of our primary coordinators, as well as co-coordinators, financial coordinators. If you're a sub-coordinator, if you are a person that's been charged with the review or the payment of P-card transactions, then from our perspective, you're a coordinator. If you are only a person that is looking at your own transactions, like that's it, you're only seeing your stuff, then you are a cardholder. But if you're a person that's reviewing and you're putting eyes on someone else's P-card stuff, well, you're a coordinator. And our annual training that we provide for our coordinators is something that we do, and it's a one-day training that we offer. It's a one-day training that we offer our coordinators. Now, in years past, we've only had 1 day, maybe 2 days of training for this one. This upcoming year, we're in the works of maybe considering offering our annual training potentially at 2 different locations on the calendar. That way, depending on your schedule, depending on your people's schedule, hopefully they would be able to attend one of those 2 trainings. Naturally, we would be providing those dates once they become confirmed, but I at least want to let you know in advance here in the fall that we are going to be offering that annual training twice in the calendar year 2020, probably one time, sometime targeting the spring potentially, and then maybe the next time in either the summer or early fall. But again, we will provide those details once they become known. The last point here on the slide really talks about the importance of knowing that no cardholder should be their own coordinator without a waiver from our office. We are certainly sensitive to those agencies who are smaller, boards and commissions as an example. And naturally, in many cases, they're just a one-person shop. It's just them. And so they, by default, are indeed having to make purchases and authorize payment on their own transactions. But there is a board that is actually the oversight for their transactions, and they are responsible to provide the board a written report, if you will, a log of their purchases, and that's being reviewed by the board. But in those situations, we do need to have knowledge of that, and a written waiver would need to be in play for those situations. And I do want to take a moment to just take one step back and talk about this financial P-card coordinator. It's important to understand that every single month we have the billing cycle. The bill has to be paid every single month. And if you have a primary coordinator, but you don't have a backup for that person, life happens. Let's just be honest. Life happens. It's unexpected. And the next thing you know, that primary coordinator is not in the office. They're out. But you don't have somebody internally there that is the backup, whether it's a co-coordinator or what we are terming as a financial coordinator, somebody that actually understands accounting. They understand the chart of accounts and funding information. So somebody that would be able to step in those situations and be able to ensure that transactions are being reconciled so that the bill gets paid on time. If you don't have somebody like that in place, that needs to happen. We need to figure out who internally there to your agency can fill that role. I believe in large part we have a financial or a co-coordinator in place in almost every single one of our agencies. Again, you have some boards and commissions that are small. They might not. And I know that number is small, but again, just as a note to yourself, if you don't have a financial coordinator or a co-coordinator in place, and you do have someone internally there that could fill that role, we need to make sure that gets done. Okay? Let's continue with the presentation to talk about fraud, misuse, and abuse. Naturally, this is one of the job responsibilities of the state auditor. Naturally, he's charged with the financial and the accounting pieces of state government to ensure that state government is spending their money wisely. And part of that responsibility is to be very due diligent on capturing instances of unlawful use, fraud, misappropriation, mismanagement. That's at a global sense. As it relates to the P-card itself, if the P-card is ever used in a situation, again, of fraud, misuse, and abuse, it is the CFO's responsibility to let us know. We have to know it within 24 hours of discovery. Now, where you can see there on the slide, there's an email address, pcardselfreport@wvsao.gov. Now, the great thing about this email address is that when the CFO sends the email within 24 hours of their discovery, there's a group of people that receive this email. and these individuals will communicate with that person, and they will let them know the next steps that have to be made. But again, this is an absolute must. This is a requirement. This is a requirement per our internal, per the P-card policies and procedures. This is a requirement. And the key about the 24 hours is important. This is not like a week later. This is not one of those things to where if there's a fraud situation, CFO finds out about it, they have some internal auditors that they charge with the investigation, and then a week later we find out about it. That violates the P-card policy and procedures. It's really important that we know about it within the first 24 hours. And so much of that is because we want to limit, we want to stop any potential continuance of fraud if it's currently in place. Like we need to put the brakes on that whole entire situation. And so that the individuals that will receive that email, they will take the necessary steps and partner with the CFO to ensure that the situation gets handled appropriately, professionally, and again, this is all part of the job duties of the auditor's office as a whole, and certainly one that the state auditor himself has really focused in on during his time in office. Specifically, fraud, misuse, and abuse, there's the code and the rule for your records, just in case you did not know where that lies when it comes to P-card. And certainly it's important, again, that you make yourself known to that. I would like to say that there could be some disciplinary actions. There probably would be some disciplinary actions, and those can range naturally depending on the situation, the severity of the situation. That can certainly have a long-reaching range. And the auditor's office, they would no doubt, if they deemed it necessary to apply some disciplinary measures, we would, of course, do so. But you yourself internally could also apply some disciplinary measures on your end in partnership or individually. So it is your program. It is your program. And if you do not have disciplinary measures in place, those should be in place, and those should be part of your internal control procedures, by the way. So that's another element that you want to consider to add to your internal control procedures. What do we do when this situation comes up that disciplinary measures are necessary? Do we have it documented anywhere? It needs to be if it is not. The P-card self-report team, here's some examples, by the way, of other things besides necessarily fraud or misuse and abuse per se, even though naturally if it is a fraud, you're going to be emailing them. If there's personal purchases that are being made on the P-card, naturally those need to be reported to P-card self-report. But we also have the option right now of using the P-card for the purchase of gift cards. Right now in our policy procedures, before that can be done, you have to receive prior approval. Prior approval. Now that prior approval means that the primary coordinator is emailing the P-card division, which, by the way, that email address is pcardoperations@wvsao.gov. Again, pcardoperations@wvsao.gov. You email us, the primary coordinator does, gives us the full scope of details on the situation. How much they want for the cards, how many cards, and how much per card, who's the card holder, the last 4 digits of the card, the reasons behind it, who are the recipients, a lot of details surrounding this request. We will investigate the request. We will make sure and ensure that the training requirements are completed, that the card holder in question is in compliance with the state regarding their training. We will investigate to see if they've actually already done the purchase. They've actually already purchased the gift cards without prior approval. Like, we will investigate that. If they have it and everything checks out well, then we will go ahead and grant the waiver for the P-card to be used for the purchase of gift cards. Again, for official state business. Now, with that said, if there's a situation where gift cards are purchased without prior approval, this would be an example of you guys sending an email, the CFO sending an email to the P-card self-report team and reporting it, and reporting that. The State Auditor's Office Public Integrity and Fraud Unit, this oversight section, is now, is actually the individual that's in charge of that is a gentleman named Anthony Woods. Anthony Woods is now over the P-card Program Oversight Division, and we're certainly grateful for his service to the state, and he and his team are the individuals that are charged with that. So that is what's in place. We also have the other individuals, Steve Conley, the General Counsel and Deputy State Auditor. He's still there, of course, serving in that capacity, as well as Kelly Snyder in the Fraud Unit Case Manager. These individuals are just a few of the team members that are part of the P-card self-report email group. When you send that, they will be the recipients of these. But Anthony Woods, of course, and I have a few slides in a moment that Anthony did send me. As he wanted to share some of the information from his group that would be helpful and beneficial to you all, and I will look forward to sharing those slides with you here in a few moments. I do want to transition now and just talk about some more general information as it relates to the P-card itself. Believe it or not, we actually have this whole list of different types of P-cards that exist. So by and large, the majority of our 8,300 P-cards that are out there are the very first option you see here, the state P-card itself, the one card, if you will. And this card is not locked down to any merchant category code. It's just wide open and is able to purchase whatever goods or services that is on behalf of the state and deemed necessary. We do have the travel card. This is a P-card that is locked down to where only travel-related purchases can be made, such as hotel stays, airline tickets, rental vehicles, for example. Travel-related type purchases, registration for conferences. So there's a handful out there. In Section 6.3 of our policies and procedures, we talk about the rules regarding travel. You're certainly welcome to read that section to familiarize yourself with that. We also have the Ghost account. Now, the travel card and the Ghost account are very similar. They're both travel-related type cards. The main difference, though, is that travel cards are issued in the name of the traveler. If it is myself, for example, traveling on behalf of the state, maybe going and visiting other state agencies, providing training on the purchasing card, let's just say I would have a travel card issued in my name, and this would permit me, again, to pay for my hotel stay, to purchase a airline ticket if I needed to do that, to purchase or to pay for the rental vehicle. It's issued in my name. Now, the Ghost card, the Ghost account itself is actually issued in the name of your agency. Okay? It's issued in the name of the agency. Now, there will still be a person that is tasked with, if you will, or charged with the care of that card. That person many times is the travel coordinator for your agency. Maybe that person is even the primary coordinator for your agency, but there still is a person charged with the care of that card. That person is charged with and would be able to book travel on behalf of a state employee of your agency. So again, let's just say that is me. I'm the person tasked with the Ghost account and the Ghost card, and my colleague Amy is traveling on behalf of the agency. I can book or reserve her hotel stay on behalf of herself. She travels to the hotel, and we've already reserved a hotel stay, and we're utilizing the Ghost card for the payment of that hotel stay. No doubt you know this information already, but what's key here is that Amy, in my example, does not carry the physical Ghost card with her. That Ghost card stays back at the agency, back at in a very secure place. Again, me as the travel coordinator charged with this Ghost card, it's only a card that I have access to. It is not a card that's just out there for anybody to grab. I'm still charged with. There still is a security measure that is fundamental to that ghost account. The emergency P card are cards that we have in place that usually just kind of sit at a $1 level and only come into play when there's a state of emergency, as issued by the state governor or the emergency personnel. When they issue an official state emergency, then we receive word of this. We are able to, per the request, raise the limits accordingly so that those charged with those emergency P cards can obviously help the good people of this state in those times of state of emergency. The managed spend card, or what are called declining balance cards, this is a very small audience that utilize this card, but it is an option, and there are certain situations where this option makes sense. But in a nutshell, these are cards that are preloaded, if you will, and then are utilized. And eventually, of course, being preloaded, just almost the idea of a preloaded gift card idea is that eventually it's going to utilize that money, draw down the money, and then eventually have nothing left on it. But it is an option. If you are interested or have questions about that, our time today doesn't allow me to really further elaborate on that, but you are always welcome to email P-Card Operations again, and we'd be more than happy to have that conversation with you to determine if a managing spend card account or approach would be beneficial to your situation. And that being said, for any of these cards that I've mentioned thus far, including the virtual P card, which I'll talk here in a second, the fleet card, if you have a question about any of these cards and whether or not what your idea or what you'd like to do, which one of these approaches would be the best, always email us. Reach out to us. We'll be happy to talk to you about that to determine what would be the best option for you all. The virtual P card itself is really, it's just a one-time use card. The idea here is that it's not a physical plastic card that a cardholder has in their possession. It's actually a virtual card number that our bank, a U.S. bank, would provide a vendor when a person needs to pay for an invoice. So you have an existing invoice, it's time to pay for it, and instead of that person issuing or giving their physical card number from their P card, there is a methodology in place, a process in place, and to which U.S. Bank would be sending that vendor a one-time use card number. They would process the transaction, and that card number disappears. The great thing about it is, of course, is it significantly reduces the opportunity for fraud, misuse, and abuse. Now, right now, this program is in its infancy. We've actually only partnered with PEIA thus far, and they have been utilizing this program. Naturally, the vendor itself has to sign up to understand and to accept the virtual card platform. And right now, we are taking baby steps to extend this program out to other agencies, and we have reached out to a few and certainly look forward to those partnerships. But that is what the virtual P card program is about. It's a one-time use P card, again, with the whole objective is to reduce the opportunity for fraud, misuse, and abuse. And there is a fleet card option. Certainly, if you have any questions about fleet card, we'd always recommend contacting fleet management and contacting them to ensure that you are following all the rules and regulations regarding fleet cards for your fleet vehicles. When it comes to the P card, through our understanding of fleet management, I believe it's the blue card, which was discontinued when it comes to fleet management. And the blue card was used for example, like the purchase of fuel for your gas cans, for your lawnmowers, those type of items. That's what the blue card was used for. That has been discontinued. No doubt you know this already. And you can use the P card for the purchase of those type of situations. But again, if you have fleet vehicles and you need a fleet card, we'd recommend you contacting fleet management to gain their counsel and how to approach those situations. Transactions. We've talked about the 630,000 plus transactions we did last fiscal year. Naturally, I cannot tell you what you are or are not allowed to buy. I'm just going to simply tell you, you need to follow all of your rules and guidelines. Contact our wonderful friends at Purchasing. You make sure that you follow all that. Now, if they come back, including Ethics Commission, by the way, I think that's a good thing to do. You should always contact the Ethics Commission. Make sure that you're that they are in agreement with what you're wanting to do. And in fact, you should have. I don't have their phone number memorized, but I know their website. You can go to the website and contact them if you need to. But you do your due diligence and make sure that everything's on the up and up. And if it is, then by all means, you can use the P card as the payment mechanism. That's really important. Now, the new gift card process, I already discussed gift card process, but we are in the process internally of coming up with a new gift card process. Specifically, what we are considering is the idea of, instead of anyone being able to use their P card for the purchase of gift cards, again, following all the rules and regulations as previously discussed, what we're considering is that if you actually as an agency are wanting to utilize the P card to buy gift cards, there will only have to be one specific card designated for the purchase of gift cards. In other words, instead of all gift card or all P cards being able to do this, we're going to say we're in the process of finalizing the approach to where, and we're considering maybe only one card for all gift card purchases. Only one card will be used for it moving forward. Once we do finalize those details, naturally we will let you know those details so that you can update your records and follow the processes. Third-party processing changes, a huge win for us over this past summer. We did tell our primary coordinators. I'm hopeful that they disseminated that information to our listening audience today, but if not, I am happy to say that we have a new third-party processing changes now. The third-party processing thing is this: PayPal, Amazon Marketplace, these other third-party processing entities out there that many times, especially when, as you guys know, we do online purchasing, and when you go to the checkout, it says there PayPal is an option, for example. Normally, in the past, you had to pump the brakes, you had to stop the train, you had to put everything on hold. You had to contact, you being the cardholder in question, had to then contact the primary coordinator. The primary coordinator had to contact our office and tell us all the details and get pre-approval before that purchase can be made. And the reason why is because you would lose your dispute rights. That pre-approval was you acknowledging the fact that you understood you were going to lose your dispute rights if you went forward on a transaction that utilized a third-party payment processor, and therefore it was just up to you guys. If there was a dispute situation, it was up to you to try to get your money back with a third-party processor. We are very happy to say that U.S. Bank has told us over the summer, has confirmed that they will back all of our third-party processing type transactions. They will back us up. So if there is a dispute situation and a third-party processor was in play, they will back you up. Therefore, we changed our policies and procedures, and we updated them and made the new policies and procedures are available on the auditor's website, as well as within the training program itself, to where the language on there has been struck when it comes to the third-party processing requiring a waiver form. That has been struck. You no longer need that waiver form, and you can move forward with your purchase without any delay. Reconciliation. Cardholders themselves, of course, have to review all transactions to make sure they're legitimate and for official state business. Now, what's important on this is that either the cardholder, him or herself, are reconciling within the system, or a proxy is doing on their behalf. Either way, every single transaction has to be reconciled. Earlier today, I happened to receive an email before joining you all this morning, and it was about the idea of dispute. And I just mentioned about the third-party processing thing. This is really important that everyone listening today understands the dispute process. Really important here. When you are disputing a transaction, understand that a dispute really comes into play when you have a situation, either a fraud has happened, So you're going to dispute that charge because you did not authorize that charge. That is a natural, I need to dispute it because I did not authorize this charge and I need to dispute it. When you do that, you are giving or you are entering into a formal dispute with U.S. Bank, meaning that the cardholder calls U.S. Bank, talks to their customer service representatives, and says, there is a charge on my card I did not authorize, and I would like to formally dispute this charge. They will then enter into a formal dispute process. They will get whatever they need to get from you. U.S. Bank will get from the cardholder whatever they need to get from the cardholder. It is a formal dispute. U.S. Bank will go through that process, and they will issue a credit for that. Now, in those situations, it does make sense for the cardholder to mark that transaction in the system as a disputable transaction. What we see way too often, though, we see the word dispute come up on transactions that really are not to be disputed. For example, a charge hit your account, and it came from a vendor that you recognize, that you know. You contact the vendor, and you are working with the vendor, and the vendor is agreeable to credit your account back. Okay. In this situation, this is not a dispute. Now, you might have disputed this transaction with the vendor, but the key here is that the vendor is working with you, and the vendor says that they are going to issue a credit. In this situation, you are not calling U.S. Bank to formally dispute the transaction because the vendor is being compliant. They're working with you. That is the big line there that you need to understand. That's the distinction. If the vendor is non-compliant, the vendor is not willing to issue the credit, they are not working with you, then in that situation, you can call U.S. Bank to formally dispute the charge. So the reason why I'm bringing this up is because we have received, as of late, and I've seen this really often. And so I want to take a moment today just to clarify that. Only in a formal dispute situation where the cardholder is contacting U.S. Bank, only in those situations should a transaction during the reconciliation process be marked disputed. Otherwise, you follow your internal control procedures and make sure that it gets reconciled as normal. And then the credit, of course, should be forthcoming, probably not on the given cycle, probably the next cycle. According to the policy procedures, you actually have up to 60 days from the statement date to formally dispute a charge. So even if initially the vendor says, yep, I'm going to issue a credit, yep, I'll do that, but just know that in 60 days, if they haven't, 60 days from the statement date, if they haven't, you have the opportunity to formally dispute the charge at that time. Okay, very good. Let's move on. Supporting documentation, oh, so important, supporting documentation. Attachments, all that good stuff. Make sure all of that is there. So important that you make sure that you review that supporting documentation. Don't just look for the little paper clip in the system that says, yep, there's an attachment there. Actually go in and review that transaction. In fact, on the policies and procedures, it actually says that the coordinators are supposed to review everything. Review it all. So double check to make sure that your coordinators are indeed fulfilling their duties and responsibilities, and they're ensuring that the documentation is legitimate, that it's right. I will do a spot check once in a while, and I will see this. I will open up a transaction. I will go to the attachments. I will open it up. I will download it, and I will look at it. And I will say, you know what? That documentation has nothing at all to do with this transaction. It is very clear that this does not match. The sad thing about it is that I'm looking at it after it's been marked for pay. So if it's already been marked for pay, that means somebody is authorizing payment of that transaction, and the documentation is not legit. So that obviously means it's not being reviewed as carefully as it should. Please make a note to double check with your primary coordinators to make sure, and anybody else that's charged with the review of stuff, to make sure that they are properly reviewing the attachments. P-card delegation naturally is prohibited. We know this. You cannot give a card that is issued in your name to somebody else. Cannot have it. Cards in my name, I cannot give my card to Samantha. I cannot give my card to Amy. I cannot give my card to anybody. It's my card, and I have to keep that secure. So please make sure that a card is not to be passed around internally there. It cannot be passed around internally. Let's, if we may, switch gears. We're going to talk about program oversight. Now, again, as I mentioned, this is from Mr. Anthony Woods, and when I contacted him, I had asked him, could you provide me some information about the Program Oversight Division? You do program evaluations naturally. What are some things that you want me to give the listening audience today? And this is what he provided to me. First of all, you need to understand that the Auditor's Office will conduct these program evaluations periodically. It's impossible for them to hit everybody every single year, but certainly they have an agenda in place where they're going to be reaching out to certain state agencies at certain times. And the whole purpose, of course, is to do this program evaluation. And what it is, it's there to assist you in understanding, they will evaluate your program. They will try to find areas that you're doing well. They will find areas maybe that are not that you're not doing so well, and they will provide some feedback to help you guys strengthen your program. It's a program evaluation. So when you receive, when they come to your office and they're going to look at your internal control procedures. They're going to review them. They're going to look at transactions. They're going to look at how you run your program and then provide for you feedback in these program evaluation feedback. So here, as you see on the slide, is just a step-by-step that Anthony provided on how they go about it. Again, the whole point is this last point is to improve your PPAR program. The intent is for them not to be bad guys walking in your office. The intent is for them to be there to assist you, to help you, to strengthen your program, to make it better, so that you can feel more confident on how the program is being run. So certainly look at it positively. If you do have any questions, here's Anthony's information. You are more than welcome to reach out to him. He would be happy to talk to you about what they do and the details of what they do, and to be able to answer any questions you might have. The last piece that I want to talk to us is really just, I just kind of want to have a conversation. And I know we're not conversating like an open telephone line for you to call back, but you do have the chat. But I just kind of want to have a heart-to-heart with you guys when it comes to procurement to payables. Procurement to payables. I just want to ask a question to all of you. How many of you have actually worked in payables before? P-card is a payables, but purchasing is procurement. But there is a distinct and clear connection that we have. But it's helpful, though, if you have some payables experience, have some procurement experience. I had asked recently at the purchasing conference this kind of question. On a scale of 1 to 10, how well do your payables people, your payables division, your payables person, and your procurement group person, division, how well do they communicate? How well do they take time to discuss, the ins and outs of what they're doing? And maybe in your situation, you're like, well, that's actually Johnny and Sally, and their cubicles are right beside each other. Okay, that's great. Maybe some of you are like, well, I'm kind of both. I wear both hats. Wonderful. But what I do know is that in many situations, these are two distinct divisions, and they are in two distinct locations internally there. And they don't do as well in the communication as they could. So what I'd like to ask you are even some further questions in this idea. We have these internal control procedures. Well, these guidelines, do they have any procurement guidelines within it? Is there anything in your internal control procedures that actually show you what they're supposed to do as it relates to procurement? Meaning like the cardholders, do they know? Do they have any idea of what the procurement guidelines are? How often does your procurement officer division talk to the payables, let alone the cardholder him or herself? This is a three-way communication. This table should be wide open for anybody to sit and to learn from one another. so that the cardholder who ultimately is paying for the goods or services, they need to know if there's a procurement, if there's an award document in place. They need to know that. And if the P card is being used for the payment of that to be able to release those encumbrances, they need to know that. So I would encourage you, have that internal discussions, talk it over. And if that is communication is not going as well as it needs to, specifically, is the cardholder required to check with procurement before making a purchase? Like, if that's not a requirement, we certainly would recommend it is, that you make that change to where that is and becomes a requirement. Because let's just be honest, does the cardholder even know that an award document is even in place, as I mentioned before? Do they even know? So that communication is really important. And I asked this next question in the purchasing conference, and I always got a dead silent answer on this one. True or false, the existence of a statewide contract requires an award document regardless of the dollar amount. Regardless of, if there's a statewide contract, does it require an award document regardless of the dollar amount? And from my understanding from the purchasing folks, the answer to this is true. This is a yes. So if there's and I would ask this as a follow-up question, do you even know what if there is a statewide contract? Are you doing your due diligence to even do that research? Specifically, I want to give you some terms and conditions. Terms and conditions. Vendors must accept payment by electronic funds transferred and P card. It's actually something that vendors, they must accept it. Now, naturally, we are the purchasing card program. We administer it, but vendors must accept the payment by EFT or P card. And then to continue with this, in the purchasing division handbook itself, in section 5.6.1, it actually states, when possible, the spending unit is encouraged to use the P card. Now, naturally, very important, it is not justification to avoid utilizing statewide or agency contracts. Okay, so there is a partnership here, and that's the whole point that I wanted to bring up to you all. There is a partnership here that we have with purchasing. P card is just a method of payment, but man, it so greatly helps out procurement when we utilize these two entities together to get the job done well. Specifically, and in closing, I'm not going to belabor these last points, but the P card can be used to release encumbered funds. If you have an award document that's in play, you can actually reference that award document to a transaction, and when you do that well and properly, it will release the encumbered funds. Now, I'm going to give you some screenshots here. Again, I'm not going to go in huge detail because it's not necessary right now in our time. But these are the fields within a transaction that if you were going to reference an award document, these are the fields. And if you do this accurately, again, and the payment document ends up going final, it will release the encumbrances. And trust me, when you get to the end of the fiscal year, it is so much better to have all of these encumbered funds that have been released throughout the year, to where when you get to the end of the fiscal year, you're not doing a whole bunch of CECs, these encumbrance correction documents, to have to all of a sudden release these encumbrances. I mean, your workload is greatly minimized if you do this properly throughout the fiscal year. The next understanding, though, is that when you do this, when you reference it correctly, as I give an example here, you put in the ADO information as I have as an example on my screen here, and you do that correctly, what's also going to happen is you're going to have to make sure your quantity unit price, you make sure all this is good. If it's a partial payment versus a full payment, again, I'm not going to go into the details as to when the situation comes up, but if all this is right, what's also powerful is that it's actually even going to bring over all of the accounting line information. That's why, by the way, that's one of the reasons why you encumber funds. You are establishing all of the funding information up front. These are the funds. You're obviously earmarking these funds to be used for this item, for the purchase item. And so you use the P card to release it. It's going to come out of the correct accounting line, and you're going to be able to adjust the amount so it's the right amount, dollar amount. And when you do this, everything will release as desired. In 3 simple steps is what it comes about, in 3 simple steps. Now, this is real important that we see such value in educating state government in this reality that we are partnering up with the purchasing division, and we are hopeful for, in the year 2020, that we will be able to arrange some regional training sites at a computer lab type setting, and we're going to invite people to sign up to register to attend, and we are going to be training people on how to do this very thing, how to connect the dots, how to take an award document a P-card transaction, to which is obviously in play to release those encumbrances, how to connect those dots well, perfectly, to discuss all the different angles around them, if it's a line type item, line type service, all those type details. We're going to go through all of those so that when the attendees leave that day, they feel completely empowered to be able to do that with efficiency and with as little grief as possible. Because, again, this is a win-win for everyone, a win-win for everyone. So at this point in our time together, again, we've been together for 2 hours. The first hour with the purchasing division, the second hour with myself and Amy here in P-card division. It's now time to open up for questions. I have here in front of me 3 individuals from the purchasing division who are well equipped to answer your questions on that side. Again, Amy and I are going to be here from the P-card side. So if you have any questions at all, utilize the chat. And I know that Samantha has already gathered some questions, and we're going to open it up. Actually, we'll put it on mute here for 1 second so that we can gather an order here of whatever it's going to go. But we will answer those questions. So go ahead and use the chat, and we will take a look and do that now. 1 second, please. Here in front of me, 3 individuals from the purchasing division who are well equipped to answer your questions on that side. Again, Amy and I are going to be here from the P-card side. So if you have any questions at all, utilize the chat. And I know that Samantha has already gathered some questions, and we're going to open it up. Actually, we'll put it on mute here for 1 second so that we can gather an order here of whatever it's going to go. But we will answer those questions. So go ahead and use the chat, and we will take a look and do that now. 1 second, please. So as of this moment, unbelievable, we actually have about 100 or so people that have tuned in today for this broadcast. So far, we have not received any questions specific to purchasing or P-card. We're going to leave this open for a few more minutes because we want to be very sensitive of everybody's time. But we also want to make sure we capture any questions you might have. That being said, after the fact, you can always, if you have a P-card question, you can always email pcardoperations@wvsao.gov. Purchasing staff here, what email can they email if they have any questions, or phone number that they can contact you all if there is any questions from purchasing related?
I think the best place to direct questions is through the procurement channels. So, you know, your procurement officer reaches out to their buyer here at the purchasing division, or if it's a higher level question, certainly I think the director here, Mike Sheets, is always open to questions, as are Frank and myself, Jimmy Meadows, General Counsel. So lots of opportunities for getting questions answered there.
Yeah, and if you're unsure of who your buyer is, you can also send an email to purchasing.division@wv.gov, and we'll make sure that the appropriate person gets it.
We did get a question here, and it appears to relate to surplus property. The question is, are there prompts to when your fixed asset inventories need to be done? And Elizabeth Perdue, the manager of surplus property, isn't with us today. So I'm going to have to defer that question. And can we send out an answer via writing to the participants here, or at least to the participant that asked?
Yes.
I don't know the answer to that one.
Yeah. The inventory is due, the certification of inventory is due July 15th of each year. I'm not sure if that's exactly what you're referring to. A physical inventory is required once every 3 years. So July 15th is the date. As far as whether or not there are prompts for that, again, we'll defer that question to Elizabeth and get you guys a response. So we're going to hang on here for just a couple more minutes, allow you guys to type in some questions.
Okay, we have not received any additional questions. And we certainly, again, don't want to keep everyone online here longer than what you need to. Certainly contact pcardoperations@wvsao.gov. If you have any P-card related questions, you can contact, as Jimmy mentioned, contact your buyer and just go that direction if you have any purchasing related questions. Well,
yeah, procedural related, that's probably the best place, and other things. Frank Whitaker, Assistant Director, or myself, Jimmy Meadows, the General Counsel, we're happy to take your questions.
Awesome.
Might be.
Samantha, before we go, what do people, if they need to receive procurement training, if there's any training that they need to receive, what can they do if they have any purchasing training or something like that? Is there anything that they can go to or
Yeah, so if you go to wvpurchasing.gov, on the left-hand side of that page, there is a training link, and that page is broken out by in-person training, webinars, online training modules, and of course this high-level officials training as well. We will be posting all of our 2020 classes online on CourseMill that you can register for starting December 1st. Of course, we'll have January through June sessions listed. And then again, just a reminder that we also do an annual conference, and that page on the training page will be updated once we know more about the 2020 conference as well.
Fantastic. Thank you, Samantha. Appreciate that. Anything else from everybody? Wonderful. Well, on behalf of the Purchasing Division, on behalf of the State Auditor's Office P-Card Division, we want to wish you all a happy Thanksgiving, certainly safe travels and time with your family. Thank you for joining us this morning. Have a great day.